Good morning, India.
I'm like me.
How are you?
Hmm.
You good?
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna give everybody a few minutes to get logged in. Happy Friday. Who else is there? Who's LGK40? Oh, I guess they don't have their microphone. Hi, Nyla. All right, I'll give everybody just like another minute or two for those who are going to join us to get logged in. I know some of you were probably doing some math stuff.
Come beside me.
Hi, Destiny. How are you?
Great.
How's everybody feeling? Week 1, almost over.
Read like me.
Who's this?
And you.
Yes.
Do we got work?
What do you think?
Yep. Do you have work today?
Uh-huh, you do.
Oh my God.
We're going to start our new book that we're going to read.
That's it.
What?
That's it.
And you're going to have some questions and I can take it, but it shouldn't take too long.
Hi, India.
I'm following.
Why can't we see you?
Oh no. Oh.
Nope. No.
No.
She let me see her the other day on FaceTime.
I want to see you. I miss your face.
There's Destiny.
Yeah.
This might be private.
Face. What do you say, India?
It might be private.
You have to be private.
All right, well, I was hoping more people would get on because I want to read this chapter together, but I guess we'll just get started and they can join us. Happy Friday. Week 1's almost over. I'm going to go over the assignments real quick just in case those of you that are on here decide that you just want to do it on your own. That is fine, just as long as you get it done with effort. I really don't mind. So let me just kind of explain what we're doing today. Get rid of that. So today we are starting the first chapter of our new book that we're going to read. It is a nonfiction book called Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. So just like if we were in class, you have a couple different things, a couple different ways you can access the reading. First of all, if you did not do yesterday's do now, go do it. It requires you to send an email to Miss McClendon. She wants to hear from you all. She misses you. So you can go back and look in yesterday's assignment post for those directions. We're going to read chapter 1 together, and we'll answer those questions as we read. If you decide you don't want to do it along with me, that's fine. You can, oh, we got a couple more. You can do it on your own. Morning, Devin.
Morning.
So chapter 1 is here. You also have the audio as well, so you can listen to it and follow along here if you'd like, or just read it on your own. As you're reading, these are those questions that you're going to answer. So at different parts in the chapter, it will tell you to stop and answer question 1, stop and answer question 2, and so on, just like we do in regular class. Before we get started, you do have a pre-reading question to answer. So why don't you guys go ahead and open up this Google form, Claudette Colvin chapter 1. Or if you're writing your answers on notebook paper, here is the question. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see your opinions. The first question you're going to answer after putting your name, is, do you think that racism still exists today? If so, how does it still exist? Give me some examples, okay? So I'm just looking for like a couple sentences. You can go ahead and open this. Again, this is in today's assignment, Claudette Colvin, Chapter 1, and you're going to answer this question before we start reading. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then we can get started. Hi, Armani. Armani, we're getting started with the stuff we're doing today. So in today's assignment post, there's a Google form called Claudette Colvin Chapter 1. You have a pre-reading question to answer. So if you're able to open that up, go ahead and answer that now. I'll give everybody a couple minutes and then we will get started.
Okay.
Or if you're writing your answers on notebook paper because that's what works for you, that is also fine. Why don't you guys just give me like a thumbs up or something when you're ready? So again, you're just answering this pre-reading question. Stop there, don't move on. Unless you decide you don't need me, which is fine. Destiny's ready. Right, thank you. India, take like another minute or so and then I'm gonna get started. If you don't finish in that time, you can always come back to it. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm gonna actually do this like this. Hopefully you guys can all see that. So this is the book that we're reading. Obviously I put a sticker on the cover, but this is what the cover looks like, Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. So yesterday we talked about, or not yesterday, I guess it was on Tuesday, we talked about Rosa Parks and kind of touched on a little bit of the Montgomery bus boycott. This is going to give us a lot of important background information on that entire civil rights movement and give us an insight into who Claudette Colvin was and the role that she played in that civil rights movement. So we're going to start with chapter 1. I'm just going to read it to you as we come to these questions. I will stop, pull up that Google form, and then you can answer that question on your own. Once we're done, you'll have an exit slip, and then that's all we're doing today. Cool? All right, let's get started. Chapter 1, Jim Crow and the Detested Number 10. I swear to the Lord I still can't see why democracy means everybody but me. Langston Hughes. He was the same guy that wrote that poem that we read on Monday called I Too. It's a pretty cool dude. Claudette Colvin. So in this first paragraph, Claudette is actually the one speaking. There's going to be times in this book where Claudette is talking and our narrator is talking, or the author that wrote this book. Remember, this is all nonfiction, so it's true, okay? You zoom in so you guys can maybe see a little bit better. Claudette Colvin. I was about 4 years old the first time I ever saw what happened when you acted up to whites. I was standing in line at the general store when this little white boy cut in front of me. Then some older white kids came in through the door and started laughing. I turned around to see what they were laughing at. They were pointing at me. The little white boy said, let me see too." For some reason, they all wanted to see my hands. I held up my hands, palms out, and he put his hands up against mine. Touch them. The older kids doubled up laughing. My mother saw us, and she saw that the boy's mother was watching. Then my mom came straight across the room, raised her hand, and gave me a backhand slap across my face. I burst into tears. She said, "Don't you know you're not supposed to touch them?" The white boy's mother nodded at my mom and said, "That's right, Mary." That's how I learned I should never touch another white person again. Go ahead and pause. We're going to answer questions 1 and 2. So I'm going to pull up that Google form. If you can do it on your screen as well, that would be the best. Question 1. In the first paragraph, Claudette describes her experience with racism, or as she puts it, I was about 4 years old the first time I ever saw what happened when you acted up to whites. In your own words, summarize what her first experience with racism was. So remember that this time period, Claudette Colvin was born, I think we're going to get that information in just a minute, but this was during like the 1940s, 1950s. So kind of that same time period, or around that same time period when that poem we read on Monday was written. So first question, you can use these sentence starters to help you, but you're typing in your answer. Just quickly summarize what Claudette's first experience with racism was. Then you're going to answer question 2. The first section of chapter 1 is a memoir. Why would it be considered a memoir? Make sense? I'll give you guys a few minutes. Go ahead and answer those 2 questions. Either you're writing it on paper or answering in your own Google form. If you're confused, just let me know and I can clarify. Thank you, Destiny. She's ready to move on. I'll give you guys like 2 more minutes or so. You can always come back to it if you need to. Nyla, the questions are in today's Friday, April 3rd assignment post. It's Claudette Colvin, chapter 1, that Google form. It looks like this. So we've already answered this pre-reading question, or if you haven't, you can come back to it. And now we're on question 1 and question 2. Nyla, did you find it? Okay, cool. Thank you, Armani. He's ready to move on. Good morning, Kahara. Kahara, we just started a couple minutes ago. If you go to today's assignment post, you're going to want to open up this Claudette Colvin chapter 1 Google form. We're reading chapter 1 and answering some questions together, okay? All right, 1 more minute, then we're going to move on. Those of you that didn't finish, you can always come back to it. Now we are switching to the author of our book, the one who wrote this, did the research, Philip Hoos. He's going to be the speaker. That's kind of what these 3 little dots indicate, that we're kind of switching who's speaking in this particular book. If, like Claudette Colvin, you grew up Black in Central Alabama during the 1940s and 1950s, Jim Crow controlled your life from womb to tomb. Black and white babies were born in separate hospitals, lived their adult lives apart from one another, and were buried in separate cemeteries. The races were segregated by a dense, carefully woven web of laws, signs, partitions, arrows, ordinances, unequal opportunities, rules, insults, threats, and customs, often backed up by violence. Together, the whole system of racial segregation was known as Jim Crow. I'm going to scoot down to the bottom of this page and read a little bit of background information about Jim Crow and why those laws were called Jim Crow laws. Who was Jim Crow? Between the 1830s and 1950s, minstrel shows starred white performers who smeared burnt cork on their faces and ridiculed African American life. Thomas, Daddy Rice, is credited with popularizing minstrel shows, it's kind of like a play, with the song Jump Jim Crow, which he said he'd heard from a black singer. After the sheet music sold widely, Jim Crow became a standard character in minstrel shows and then evolved into a term to represent the whole system of laws and customs that segregated black and white Americans. That's kind of how they got that term. Obviously, it was very racist and problematic. Jim Crow's job was not only to separate the races, but to keep blacks poor. In 1950, nearly 3 in 5 black women in Montgomery, Alabama's capital city, worked as maids for white families, and almost 3/4 of employed black men mowed lawns and did other kinds of unskilled labor. The average black worker made about half as much money as the average white. The only professional jobs open to blacks were pastoring a black church and school teaching, which was open because of segregated schools, recalled the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, the minister of the First Baptist Church in Montgomery during the 1950s. We're going to pause and look at questions 3 and 4. So go ahead and go back to that Google form. You're answering question 3. Which of the following sentences best defines Jim Crow? Please feel free to open up that chapter in Google Classroom if you need to look back. And question 4, what kind of jobs did black people have in 1950? And I just want to reiterate again that this isn't to encourage these types of views or ways of thinking. It's to see things from a historical point of view and learn about Claudette Colvin, who was an extremely, still is, extremely important historical figure who a lot of people don't know about. I was glad to see that many of you know her, but there's a lot of history here too that I think it's important that we learn and discuss. So you're answering questions 3 and 4. I'll stop talking now so you can do that. Jahid, we are in today's assignment. So you're going to want to open up this Google form right here, Claudette Colvin, Chapter 1. We're reading together and answering questions as we go.
You gotta stop.
If at any time you guys have questions, please just let me know and we can address them together. Give you another minute or two to answer questions 3 and 4. Would it be more helpful if I have the questions up while you're answering or have the book up? I guess, can you guys unmute yourselves? I don't know if you can.
I could just unmute myself so they probably
Okay.
can.
So let me know if you have an opinion, whether it's more helpful to have the questions on my screen while you're answering them or to have the book on my screen. Let me know, whatever is better for you. All right, here we go. Back to page 4. Jim Crow kept blacks and whites from learning together, playing or eating meals together, working or riding buses or trains together, worshiping with one another, and even going up and down in the same elevator or throwing a ball back and forth in the same park. Black and white citizens drank water from separate fountains and used different bathrooms. They were forbidden. Jahid, you good? They were forbidden to play sports on the same team, marry one another, or swim together in the same pool. Some of the segregation laws didn't matter too much in the daily lives of Black citizens, but the bus was different. Riding the bus was like having a sore tooth that never quit aching. Montgomery's neighborhoods were spread out, and the maids and yard boys, people like Claudette Colvin's parents, who scraped together a few dollars by attending to the needs of white families, depended on the buses to reach the homes of their white employers. Thousands of students also rode the buses to school from the time they were little, learning the transfer points and schedules by heart. They gathered in clusters at the corners, chatting and teasing and cramming for tests until the green and gold buses chugged into view and the doors snapped open. Most Blacks had to ride the bus. Go ahead and stop and answer question 5. Taking you back to some figurative language. Read the passage from page 4, then answer question 5. Some of the segregation laws didn't matter much in the daily lives of Black citizens, but the bus was different. Riding the bus was like having a sore tooth that never quit aching. The sentence, riding the bus was like having a sore tooth that never quit aching, would be considered which of the following? Synonym, metaphor, hyperbole, or simile. You got to think way back to these, right? Jahid, you have a question? Nope, it's not working. Jahid, you have a question? Go ahead and unmute yourself. I don't know why. Oh, there you go. Imani, go ahead.
Ain't a simile like using like? Ain't that what a simile is?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Simile is, remember, you're making a comparison between two things using like or as. A hyperbole is that exaggeration. All y'all love to be dramatic, so think of it like that. Metaphor is comparing things without using like or as, and your synonym is just a word that means the same as something else. Give you another minute to make your answer. If you have questions, just unmute yourself and let me know. I gave you that power. Jahid, unmute yourself and then you can ask me. There we go. Jahid, go ahead.
All right. So it ain't about the game. It's about my book that I'm reading.
Okay, ask me later.
Okay.
All right, bye. Okay, let's keep moving. I'm going to flip to a couple pages and read this little snippet of information about transportation. So we're going to talk about this next week, but nonfiction books have different kinds of text features. These are one of those. It's like a little sidebar that gives you some additional information. Montgomery, transportation pioneer. In 1886, Montgomery became the first city in the Western Hemisphere to convert a street railway system to electricity. The trolley line was proudly known as the Lightning Route. 20 years later, on November 23rd, 1906, Montgomery also became the first U.S. city to totally segregate public transportation. A city ordinance or law passed on that day and said that blacks in all public accommodations had to be completely separated from whites. Despite the grumblings of the trolley company owners who did not want to pay for the new cars, totally separate trolley cars for blacks were established. So Montgomery was unique in the fact during this time period in 1906 that black people and white people had to completely ride like separate different means of transportation. So in 1906, even the public transit was separate. Okay, back to page 5. But everything about riding a bus was humiliating for black passengers. All riders entered through the front door and dropped their dimes in the fare box near the driver. But unless the entire white section was empty, blacks alone had to get off the bus, had to get back off the bus and re-enter through the rear door. Sometimes the driver pulled away while Black passengers were still standing outside. Let's go ahead and pause and answer question 6. In what ways was riding the bus different than other forms of segregation faced in the South? So remember, segregation was that legal separation of people based on their race. So you're looking at that last paragraph that we read, and I can put that back up on the screen too, and telling me how riding the bus was different than other forms of segregation faced in the South. And I didn't need to click that, so don't take that as like a sign. I'll put this up. We'll try that. So you're answering question 6. Give you another minute or so, and then we will keep rolling. I'm bummed there's not more people on. I hope that everybody else does this.
The math had just like a check-in today, so I wonder if they thought. Well,
hopefully they log on. All right, another 30 seconds and I'm going to keep moving. We got a couple pages left, 2 more questions, and then you can do your exit ticket. All right, here we go. Everybody good? Okay. In other southern cities like Atlanta and Nashville and Mobile, Black passengers sat in the back and white sat in the front of the bus with the 2 groups coming together in the middle as the bus filled up. When all the seats were taken, riders of both races stood. But Montgomery had its own rules and traditions. Here, each bus had 36 seats. The first 4 rows of seats, which held 10 passengers, were reserved for white passengers only. Day after day, weary Black passengers remained standing over empty seats in front. Trying to hold on to their packages and small children, they jostled for balance, even as the aisles became jammed with dozens of seatless passengers. Seating behind the first 10 seats was up to the driver, who constantly glanced into the mirror above his head to keep track of who was sitting where. So again, Montgomery, Alabama had these very strict laws when it came to their public transportation. Regardless of in other cities, once the seats were taken, white people and Black people just stood up. However, Montgomery didn't do that. If the 10 white seats in front were filled, the driver ordered Black passengers to surrender their seats in the middle and the rear of the bus to newly boarding white passengers. In fact, if even one white passenger wanted to sit in a row occupied by 4 Black riders, the driver would glance up and yell, "I need those seats." All 4 Blacks were expected to stand up and make their way to the rear. It didn't matter if they were elderly, pregnant, ill, or balancing children on their laps. It also didn't matter that the city bus law, or ordinance, as city laws are called, had said since 1900 that no rider had to give up a seat unless another was available. Drivers simply ignored the law until it became customary for Blacks to move when the driver told them to. When he said to get up, he expected people to get up, and they did. If there were no seats left in the rear, Black passengers were simply out of luck. So in Montgomery, it was an unwritten rule, not really a law, because the law stated otherwise, that white passengers took precedence over Black passengers, even if there were open seats. So if the bus driver demanded that 4 African-American passengers needed to get up so that one white person could sit in that row by themselves, they were expected to do so. The Montgomery City Lines Bus Company hired tough men to command their buses, and Montgomery's city ordinance gave them police powers. Every driver understood from the day he was hired that his main job, other than driving the bus, was to enforce the Jim Crow rules. Some drivers carried pistols. Let's go ahead and pause and look at question 7. How was the bus segregation system in Montgomery much worse than other areas? You don't really have to use 3 details, just give me one example. So we've read several so far that many other cities didn't have as strict of rules or laws as Montgomery did when it came to segregation on the buses. I'm going to go ahead and put that portion of the book that we just read back up. That way you can reference it as you're putting your answer. Don't worry about giving me 3 examples, just give me one, and then we can move on. Again, if you have a question, just unmute yourself, let me know. Who's joining us? Oh. So you're giving me one example of how the bus segregation systems in Montgomery were much different and much worse than in other cities. This paragraph is also a good one to reference too. Give you another minute or two.
It's like,
Yes.
it's the only thing we're doing today.
This, and then you have a quick exit ticket afterwards.
Okay.
And that's it. Week 1, almost done. I think that this is a really great book. I taught this to my 5th graders the first year. It was kind of tough for them, but we made it through. But they really enjoyed it. Another 30 seconds, then I'm going to move on. My dog is sitting at my feet, sleeping, being a bad coworker. All right, back to page 7. Here we go. Having to stand up at the end of a long day within plain sight of an empty seat was both depressing and infuriating. The 10 empty seats became an obsession to weary workers, wrote Joanne Robinson, an English professor at Alabama State College at the time. The number 10 became a damnable number. Nobody wanted that number on anything that belonged to him. Because remember, 10 represented those 10 seats on the bus that were reserved specifically for white passengers. It didn't matter if the back half of the bus, which was supposed to be that segregated portion for black passengers, didn't matter if those 10 seats at the front were empty and the seats in the back were full. Black passengers had to stand. So that's why they're saying this number 10 was like such a detested number. They didn't want anything to have that number 10. And being packed together inside a small tube magnified the rudeness of segregation. There were no Negro drivers, recalled Martin Luther King Jr. of the Montgomery buses. It was not uncommon to hear drivers referring to Negro passengers as black cows and black apes. So again, a lot of really terrible things that these bus drivers just had the power to do and say. Over the years, a few black riders stood up to the drivers. In 1946, Geneva Johnson was arrested for talking back to a driver and not having the correct change. Charged with disorderly conduct, she paid a fine and her case was dismissed. A few years later, Viola White and Katie Wingfield were arrested for sitting in seats reserved for whites. They also pleaded guilty and paid fines. Let's go ahead and look at question 8. Well, don't know what happened to question 8, so lucky you. Jahid, go ahead. Except you're still muted. I don't know why it's taking so long. I don't know, dude. Jahid, you're going to have to unmute yourself. It's not working when I click it. Okay, so we'll skip question 8 because it's not on there. I don't know what happened to it. Jahid, just unmute yourself. It's not working for me. In the summer of 1949, 16-year-old Edwina Johnson and her brother Marshall, 1 year younger, had come down from New Jersey to visit relatives in Montgomery. During their stay, they climbed aboard a city bus and sat down next to a white man and his son. The white boy ordered Marshall to move. Deeply offended, Marshall refused. The driver twice ordered the Johnsons to the back, but they stayed put. Why should things be different here than back home? The exasperated driver radioed police, who were waiting at the next stop to arrest them. When Edwina and Marshall's relatives were called, they hurried to the police station, paid the teenagers fines, and got them out of jail. Soon the Johnsons, shaken, were on their way back to New Jersey. So Montgomery was so different than other cities that even when people visited, they were like, what do you mean I have to move? Like, no, I'm in the back of the bus, which was still even unfair, obviously. But they didn't understand that it was so different. It could get rougher. A driver showered insults upon a woman named Epsie Worthy when she refused to pay an extra fare at a transfer point. Miss Worthy got off the bus rather than pay more, only to have the driver follow her outside and begin punching her. She fought back with her fists, exchanging a flurry of blows with the driver, who spat upon her as he struck her. Police separated the two and charged Miss Worthy with disorderly conduct. Let's go ahead and look at question 9. What happened to Epsie Worthy when she got off the bus after refusing to pay an extra fare at a transfer point? Answering that question based off of what we just read. We've got the rest of this page, 3 more questions, your exit ticket, and then you are good. There's the question. I'm going to show you that paragraph in the book. That way you can reference that if you need to. Again, you're asking or answering what happened to Epsie Worthy when she was told to get off the bus using those multiple choice answer questions. Another 30 seconds and we're going to move on, finish this chapter up. All right. The most shocking incident of all happened in 1952 when a man named Hilliard Brooks boarded a City Lines bus, dropped a dime in the fare box, and headed down the aisle toward the back. A driver shouted at Brooks to come back, get off, and reboard through the rear door. Brooks said he'd rather walk and asked for his dime back. The driver refused, an argument heated up, and the driver called police. An officer soon boarded the bus, ordering Brooks off. Brooks wouldn't budge until he got his dime back. Sorry. The policeman shot him and Brooks later died of his wounds. The coroner ruled his death justifiable homicide. Justifiable because the officer said Brooks had been resisting arrest. So you have to keep in mind that these Jim Crow laws, this segregation, this discrimination was happening on a legal level. So these police officers and these judges in this position of power were siding with were siding against those African Americans. Obviously extremely problematic, and the officer was not fair in saying that he was resisting arrest, because he wasn't. The few passengers who defied the drivers usually cooled off at the police station, paid their fines, and tried to put their humiliating experiences behind them. Why fight? The white judges, the intimidating police, the insulting drivers, and the crushing weight of all the years of custom and law were simply overwhelming. Ms. Furlong, will you give Blake's mom a call? She just called me. I think he can't find the Zoom link.
Yep.
Thank you. But change was in the wind. On Monday, May 17, 1954, the case of Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. The U.S. Supreme Court outlawed racial segregation in public schools, meaning that it was no longer allowed for public schools to be segregated. It was a solid punch to Jim Crow, one that produced powerful shockwaves throughout the South. The ruling allowed Black students to anticipate a different future and embolden a few of them to try to make it happen. One such student was 15-year-old Claudette Colvin, whose school had been studying Black history almost nonstop for a solid month. Around 3:30 on March 2nd, 1955, this slim, bespectacled high school junior boarded the Highland Gardens bus with a few of her friends and slid into a window seat on the left side, behind the white section. She piled her textbooks on her lap, smoothed her blue dress, and settled back for a 5-block ride that not only would change the course of her life, but would spark the most important social movement in U.S. history. That's where we're going to stop for today. You have questions 10, 11, and 12 to answer on this Google form. Once you have answered them, please make sure you click submit, and then you have an exit ticket after that. Question 10, what is the author's purpose of this chapter? So again, thinking about that entertain, inform, persuade, or memoir. How does the author develop that purpose? These two questions are going to go together. Question 12, what genre would this chapter be considered? Just do your best on question 12. We can talk more about that. As you're working through these last 3 questions, once you finish, again, you're clicking submit. Then you're going to go back, complete this exit ticket. I'm just going to stay on Zoom. So if you have questions, you need help, please just unmute yourself. Let me know. Otherwise.
He just logged on, so now he's connected.
Okay, good. No problem. Otherwise,
Thank you.
you guys are good. Hi, Blake. Glad you could join us.
Miss Eichmann.
Jahid, go for it.
All right, so this book I was telling you about, it's called Slam.
Yeah.
Like, me and my sister been working on it.
Reading the book?
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
And this how much I got on the page thing.
How many pages you've read?
No, I'm talking about my brainstorm thing.
Oh.
But
Wow.
that's all I had got.
Nobody cares. I'm just playing. I'm just playing. I'm just playing. I'm just playing. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Nobody. No.
India.
No. No.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Jahid, I'm very proud of you. I want you to work on these. If you need to hop off and connect with Ms. Furlong to get some more help, you can.
Jahid, do you want to Zoom with me?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay, go click that same link under the science Google Classroom that you did last time, okay?
Okay.
Bye, Jahid.
Bye.
Blake, I know you're just joining us. It's probably going to be helpful for you to go back and watch the video. Once we're done here, I'll post it. essentially what we did together is we read chapter 1 of the book that we're starting, which I don't know why it's being goofy for me, but this is the book that we're starting, Claudette Colvin. Throughout the chapter, it has stopping points for different questions, so you're just going to stop and answer those on this Google form, okay? If you need extra assistance, you can reach out to me and Miss Furlong. We pretty much finished together, so Blake, you're going to want to go back and you can also listen to that chapter being read. There's a video right here. Just make sure you pause it when it's time to answer those questions. I don't know what that is. I'm here if you guys need me. The rest of this time is pretty much yours. Please don't forget to click submit once you're done here, and then you're going and you're doing that exit ticket. Maybe I will play a little working music.